I think we really wanted to just kick this off and sort of talk through what the purpose of the committee is, talk about cadence, how we want to meet, how we want to go forward. I think the statute envisions, and I think we all recognize that there's a lot of different agencies and entities in DC working on clean energy, working on sustainability. And so making sure that there's a more formal way that we're coordinating is helpful. And that's really, I think, what the purpose of this committee is just make sure that we are touching base somewhat regularly, that we do have those formal communication lines open. Technically, this is an open meeting, so I think for the next one, we'll be earlier in getting that notice out there, so we may have some more public interest. So we'll keep that in mind as we go forward. But overall, I think it's pretty straightforward. We all working for the same goals, want to make sure we can meet the city's climate and sustainability goals, city's inclusivity goals. And so I want to make sure we're coordinating with you all to do that. We put together, and I'm sharing this, so hopefully you all can see, we put together just a very rough agenda. I think we've covered introductions, but really wanted to look at what the purpose is that we're required to implement under the statute, talk about what we might need to put together in our charter, how we want to handle roles, goals for the committee, and then also, what our cadence should be. So Sandy, do you want to talk about the purpose?
Absolutely, sure. So as Eli mentioned earlier, the purpose, we have a statutory purpose for this special committee. It is to, in this agenda, I've laid out the language out of the statute, which is reflected in our bylaws as well. It is to advise the Green Bank and the board about the design and implementation of our projects and programs, so that they're both in alignment with and complementary to all of the other programs in the district, particularly operated under the auspices of DOEE and the CSEU. So we, in terms of identifying the purpose, I think for us to be able to really articulate how we're going to work together is going to really maximize the amount of alignment and complementary action that we're able to do, and really be able to integrate efforts to, for the benefit of district residents. So that's the brief overview.
Dave or Ted, any questions or thoughts on that? I think it's pretty straightforward, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's straightforward. I would offer this, and it's clearly not for this meeting, but maybe something we should think about in about 6 months or so, which is the utilities will start to have the opportunity to offer energy efficiency programs. Of what scale that has not been determined yet, but I think they will be of somewhat of a significant scale. Those program offerings, though, won't commence probably until about at least 8 or so months from now. So to the extent that it's appropriate to bring them into these discussions, at a time down the road, I think I would welcome that. I see them as integral players in this same space as well.
Absolutely. And to piggyback on what Ted's saying, there's a lot happening, as y'all know, in the district, and there's going to be, I'll be sure to keep an ear to the ground for all the variety of different things happening, not just at DOE, but across other agencies and DC government as well. And just more broadly, there's a lot of moving pieces. And so, I think perhaps calling in, different people to give us overviews of the work that they do, whether it's utilities or something like the hub or other players, that would be great to think about.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I think the hub is an obvious partner here, given their role. Now we, in setting the committee up, there was I think there were a couple of models. One was we tried to invite every agency who has some role in this, but I felt that would be a little bit unwieldy, and so better to have the core folks who are really dealing in the weeds on some of these issues, and then to your all suggestion, we can bring in others as needed. That'd be helpful.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me, Eli.
Great. Then in terms of a charter, and I think it's helpful to have some governing principles, bylaws. Sandy, were you thinking we would draw those up, or Ted, I know you all have a couple of committees. I don't know if you have a model that you like.
We've have a model for a charter. Yes. Let me ask you. Maybe this is a different sort of a question. What do we have a statutory requirement to report to anybody on any sort of periodic basis?
We have to report to the Green Bank Board, and Sandy's got in here the annual report statement. We have to do so at least for that. I don't think there's another cadence specifically called out. But
okay,
generally,
so this isn't like any sort of report that goes to the council on an annual basis or anything. It's a report to the Green Bank Board on a. Did you say
periodic? Quarter? No, it's not. It's not specified.
That can be a part of our charter, right? For this group is to determine on what cadence to meet and what to report and how frequently to report. DC Green Bank in general has several reporting features on the public accountability front. We have our annual report, which we are required to issue on it, issue within 90 days of the end of our fiscal year. And then we have performance targets that we will also be designing and developing and reporting to the board as well as the public. And those are our two primary places where we'll be reporting. I would imagine we would, maybe not for this first annual hearing that we're having, but we will probably also want to showcase what this group is doing at our annual public hearings, which will also occur on an annual basis. Our first one is this December, but we will be moving that into a spring cadence.
Great.
Okay. All right.
How often are you reporting out on your performance targets? Is that like a quarterly thing, or?
First, we have to develop our performance targets.
Well, there you go.
And then they get reported in our annual report.
Annually. Okay. Gotcha. Great.
So if you want me to like get a template of a charter, I can do that.
We're happy to, or if you have one handy, that'd be great. Sort of whatever's easier. I don't have a strong preference.
Okay, let me see if I can find one.
If I can share since this is the first committee meeting, I can share my ignorance without being behind on anything, I would imagine. But I would think a great initiative for this is certainly beyond, but it's a great opportunity to reflect how many jobs are being created by the efforts in sustainability. And it's nice to give a general number, but it's also great to give specificity.
Well, Ted knows a lot about reporting on green jobs. So he probably has some thoughts on that. It's a good idea.
Yeah, so I think it's a great idea, and just by way of background, we report what we call direct jobs. that means, jobs where we're actually paying a salary to an employee, or we've hired a subcontractor and they have employees working for them and we can track those hours. And then there's a third slice to that, which is we look at, and I think this is more germane to the work that we'll be doing with the Green Bank. We look at how much money we spend in incentive dollars to help a project move forward. Green Bank might think about, well, how much money they are loaning out to help finance a project and help therefore make it move forward. And then we use a formula that was devised by the Obama administration when the stimulus money hit the streets, almost 12 years ago, that says, you take this number of dollars you've put out on the street, divide that by 200,000, and economists have said that equates to a job that's been created. So for $1 million, you divide that by 200,000, you've created 5 jobs, for example. So we use those 3 different mechanisms to just track what we would call direct jobs. I think there's a broader impact as well that unfortunately we are not tracking, but I think it's just as important, which are what we call indirect and induced jobs. For example, if we're able to go and help a building shave its energy usage by 20%, and so that's, cutting $500,000 a year off of their operating expenses, are they then able to hire a person or two, either to work in the energy space or to work somewhere else in the building and do something else? These are creating jobs as well, because there's money saved and therefore there's money that can be invested in other sorts of opportunities. So we unfortunately don't track those indirect and induced jobs, but I think it's a really good thought to think about, the number of jobs that are created on a direct level, and how we might go about tracking those.
The trickle down economics of job counting.
Because Dave, look, it was people who work very close to you over at DOE are thought around tracking the indirect and induced jobs.
Yeah.
You weren't there at the time when we had some of those discussions, but we think that those jobs are clearly tracked. Well, look, if we're changing markets in this city to say, all right, we know we're going to move a certain number of products, lighting products. We know we're going to use a certain number of people that are going to have to stock the shelves with those lighting products. People have to load them onto the trucks and things like that. Those are indirect jobs that are created, but we can't. We're not allowed to track them. But it doesn't mean that they're not there.
You're not allowed to. Are you not allowed to track them, or you're not allowed to use them for contractual purposes?
Probably the latter is more accurate. We could track them, but in terms of our performance incentives, that are tied up with DOEE,
right? No, it wouldn't affect.
There's nothing to, we can't say, okay, hey, here's another, 50 indirect jobs or induced jobs. Right.
No, it is a challenge we face as we're in the process of figuring out what our metrics should be. One of our goals as a Green Finance Authority is to not just be investing in the city, but also making sure that other private capital is coming in and investing, right? So we're creating a market, we're demonstrating financing tools and technologies that are applicable and replicable. How do we then measure success of others, following in our footsteps, right? I mean, I think that's it's a real challenge to measure. We know we need to do it. We know we want to focus on it, but how do we look at that induced investment and related job creation is a challenge.
And you can look at it in an additive way, which is, let's say you're not financing the entirety of the project. Let's say you finance half of it or 60% of it. In my view, your ability to finance $600,000 on $1 million project means that $1 million worth of investment in this city happened. Somebody is underneath that investment installing some sorts of measures. So I would say, hey, track the larger until somebody calls us out on it and says, you're looking at it wrong. I would
No,
use
absolutely.
a larger number. It's not the way we do it, but just
Right.
for the sake of argument, it's the way I would suggest,
No,
that
I
the
agree.
bank does it.
Absolutely. We're making the deal happen.
Yeah, and Eli, I really struggle with this piece too. I think it's what you're talking about, but like, for instance, we're trying to get more net zero energy buildings in the district, knowing that through that you're starting to build a building industry that has experience with those projects that can facilitate the installation and the products, like all those, building all those pieces, and so the people who come behind there can that much more or easily do the work, and so what is the value of being the pioneers or being the organization to make the first dozen happen or more, like whatever amount that is, to it starts like kind of like the dam gives way and it starts to go.
Right.
Like, what is it? The monkey on the tree theory? It's like the 100th monkey or something like that. Have you heard that? It's
No.
like it's basically the thing is like if there's a tree full of fruit, they've like studied where like, well, one monkey might go over there and start eating the fruit or something, and then maybe another one will go, but like once there's a tipping point, once there's like, let's say 10 monkeys eating fruit, then all the monkeys are like, oh, that's good, I'm coming over, and then they storm the tree and eat it all. But
the tree falls down. No.
Yeah, right. But you sort of need the first person to stick their neck out a bit to make some of these things happen. And we know this has value, but how do you value that? How do you tell the story on it? It's hard to do. And I feel like DC is stuck at a couple of crossroads with this right now in the high performance building space.
Well, I think that one of the things that I'm excited about this committee and also our work together, right, is I think, sitting around the table, we've got a pretty broad range of expertise, because you need the engineering expertise and the building folks who know what they're doing, which you all are helping to bring. We need the rebates for those first movers, right, to get those projects off the ground. And then you also need to establish the financial infrastructure, right? So, thinking about your net zero energy building model, one of the areas we'd love to be more involved in is, well, what is that building then appraised for, right? Is the appraisal capturing the true value of, this building is going to have zero fuel costs for the next 20, 30 years, right? So taking into account holistically, what are all the pieces that we need to move the clean economy forward? I think we have a significant chunk of them kind of on the phone with us right now. And so look forward to working with you all.
Absolutely.
To figure out how we can best do that together. One area that I can share this document, for those of us who work at it daily, we kind of understand the ecosystem of agencies who are working on this problem, but I don't think there's a simple distillation of that that's out there for the public. So I know when I started, I was trying to figure out, which agencies are doing what and which funding's available and, where the rebates are. And certainly if you're a owner or a building owner and you're trying to figure it out, unfortunately, I don't think it's easy to say, oh, I'm looking at air conditioning, I need to go talk to these folks, right? So thinking about, I know the hub is going to be working on this type of communication, but thinking about how we can at least clarify for the public who's doing what and what the kind of steps are that they should take if they're trying to make improvements and upgrades.
Mm-hmm. It also absolutely, and it'd also be helpful, I think, to a more granular level filter out like what type of development schemes and project types actually work in certain situations. Like PACE, for instance, many folks have been like, well, I can't use PACE because it doesn't work for affordable housing for whatever reason, and I don't really understand the inner workings, but it does work in other building types with other development models. And the paradigm for like a owner developer versus like a developer versus like a really fast-paced developer who's going to like sell it at permit, sell it at halfway through construction, sell it at completion, and sell it, once it's like, like those folks need and want different things, have different motivations, and different products work for different pieces of that. So that's I've basically just targeting that, because there's a lot of generalized information out there. I feel like people know a lot of these places by name, but don't necessarily know how to access in a very targeted way.
David, it's a great point that you mentioned about specifically the PACE program. Being in a bank and a lender, it's a perfect example of it's not marketed well, and it's not broadly used, and the lender doesn't want to get into it because they think it's too complicated. And most of these lenders that are tasked with a PACE loan are usually younger, and they don't want to become, because it's new to them, and it's usually new to the bank. So it's a great opportunity to market specific programs, to let the lenders know, the conventional lenders know that it's not so complicated, and there's an end result.
Absolutely.
One thing that, and forgive me if this is not the committee, but we were talking about different utilities. It would be great to be nimble in being able to also share with, and Ted would know better than me, but if there's a reduction in energy usage, how does a utility like Pepco feel about that? And does that take away from their bottom line?
Well, let me. I'm going to offer this. Are we being recorded?
Yes.
We are.
Yeah.
Let me be careful with what I say. Washington Gas and Pepco view a reduction in energy usage in very different ways. Washington Gas, let me start with Pepco. Pepco has what are called decoupled rates. So to the extent that there is a reduction in energy usage, there is an automatic true up at the end of the year, which guarantees Pepco its agreed upon rate of return with the Public Service Commission. Washington Gas has requested a similar rate structure, from the Public Service Commission over the years. I mean, this is not a recent request. This has been going on for years, but they don't have a similar rate structure. So to the extent that Washington Gas experiences a loss of revenue due to declining sales of natural gas, their rates are not trued up, and in fact, it's lost revenue. So the two utilities are effectively on different rate structures. That's by choice of the Public Service Commission, and I won't, opine as to why the commissioners landed there, but that's where they are.
Yeah.
And so, Ted, is the reverse also true, that if Pepco sees significant increase in electricity use, that it will not see increased revenue?
It would be interesting to see if that in fact happens, but the reality is their sales have been declining steadily, and this is according to the numbers that Betty Ann King, the former chairperson of the commission, would report out when we would meet, regularly with the DCSEU's advisory board. So their sales have been on a,
right,
steady little decline. And Dave, you probably know this better than I. You probably have more current numbers than I. This year is terrible.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I've heard numbers that energy sales are down by 20%. Not like 1% or so, like they, you know, like they normally are, but by like 20%.
Yeah, and along with it, our SCPF revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, say that, you know, the revenue that's helping all of us fund our operations, you know, like you and me and,
Yeah.
you know, and money for DOEE, that's all in serious decline. Since, you know, this, I call this the 8-month anniversary of our last day in the office, you know, which was March 13th. So today is exactly 8 months since I think a lot of us kind of abandoned working in these office buildings, and then you saw this significant, the decline has been in the commercial space, not in the residential space. Residential usage is up, but residential usage overall in the city is not that significant anyway. You know, the big usage is in the large commercial buildings. Your hospitals are full, but your universities, your hotels, your sports arenas are sitting there, you know, shuttered.
Right. No, no, it's a good point about this year in particular. We've been focusing, and we talked about this briefly, but you know, we've been focusing on trying to engage and support the electrification transition from both the building side and the transportation side. And so making sure that we understand the utility reward mechanism is important.
Right. Well, and you know, and I think that, I mean, this has been a public statement that Washington Gas has made. You know, even though the Clean Energy Omnibus Bill allows them to now initiate energy efficiency programs, they've expressed a reluctance to engage in such programs until they get decoupled rates similar to those that Pepco enjoys right now.
Right.
So you know, Dave, you've heard them. You've been around the table when they've said that. I mean,
Yeah.
they've been pretty straightforward about it.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, too, I mean, the strategic plan that they put out, their decarbonization plan,
Mhm.
has increased gas sales projected. Like it's not, you know, they're not planning on selling less or, you know, it's going to be all renewable or what do they call it? Like methane capture. I forget the name of it. Renewable natural gas, I think, or something like that. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's right, Ted.
Have they named a new commissioner, or are they still just 2 commissioners? Public Service Commission.
They were still at 2
Yeah, still at 2.
last thing that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Is that deliberate? I don't know what the motivation behind only having 2 is, but it seems like it's been vacant for a while.
It's probably been vacant since I remember Commissioner Gillis leaving. I want to say that was probably last February, you know, February of this year. But you know, I don't know. I know some of the people involved in the process. You know, I know people have applied. I've heard you know, from a few people who have applied, but I haven't seen a name go forward in terms of a nomination. That's a nice position. You know,
Mm-hmm.
pay as well and everything, and you know, good folks over there.
They get hammered in those confirmation hearings. They get hammered by all the environmentalists. There's a couple of people that reached out to me and asked if they should apply. I was like, well, you know, depends on how well you take incoming fire.
So just to kind of make sure some action items and next steps coming out, I think Ted, you'll work on sharing a charter draft with us. In terms of roles for this committee, you know, I think obviously we're all working on programs that have overlapping benefits and impacts. So I think there's there's a basic coordination role, understanding what each other's offerings are, making sure we know what each other's offerings are, and making sure those are structured in a way as to be complementary, right? I think that's work we're already undertaking, but I think the formal role of the committee is to help make sure that's happening and reporting out on it and making any recommendations, at least to the Green Bank Board. As we were talking, I think coordinating on our communications is a key area. We've started doing a little bit of that for the projects we're working on together, but making sure that DOEE, SEU, and Green Bank comms teams are all aware of what the other efforts are that are ongoing and amplifying when appropriate and where appropriate. We have some coordinated messaging for some of our key goals. And then one question I had for the two of you, the Green Bank has a statutory directive to advise the council on legislation that may be needed to help support the clean economy. Is that something that you all could have input on as well? I don't want to cause any challenges for you.
Define what you mean by input.
Suggesting draft legislation, potential changes, identifying areas of problematic legislation or regulation that need to be adjusted. Those types of.
The short answer is yes, and then let me, from our perspective at the SEU, and then let me give you a little bit longer answer. And so what we normally do when there's a proceeding in front of the council is to, we would draft up a position and then run that by, Mr. Epley and his team over at DOEE before, we're contractors to them. And so we would run our position by them before we went public with it in any way. So that's the way we normally, handle kind of legislative matters. They're from time to time, there's, a number of different things that'll bounce up before the council. I mean, we wouldn't weigh in on, for example, whoever might be the next nominee to the Public Service Commission or something like that.
Right.
But if Councilmember Che or somebody were moving a major environmental bill, clearly, yes, it would be worth, all of us getting our thoughts together and coming hopefully with a unified stance in terms of, how we presented our views, before.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure DOE, of course, would be open to helping and providing feedback on legislation as well, in coordination with SEU. Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we got started a decade ago, Councilmember Che would openly say at the performance oversight hearings, hey, are there things that I could tweak in legislation, in your enabling legislation or anything like that would help you improve your operations? And she was very open-minded. It's her thought that if she's drafted legislation to set these things up, that is a policy to a legislative sort of a position. But then when the rubber starts hitting the road, there can be unintended circumstances, and she's probably amended the law, our enabling legislation, times to help us, improve the work that we do here in the city. So yeah, I mean, she's always she doesn't try to set something up for it to then not succeed. Yeah, that doesn't look good on anybody's ledger. So so yeah, she and others, I would assume would be very helpful, and easy to talk to. Now, it's a sidebar here. Whether you've got 3 new council members that'll come on to one's already on there. 2 more new ones will come on in January. I imagine there might be some shifting around of committees. And so that may be something that, all of us will need to take a look at to see how that impacts our operations. Does Councilmember Che continue to, chair transportation and environment, or is there a new chair and clearly there's going to have to be some new members on the committee because, you know, Brandon Todd and Jack Evans were on the committee, I believe. And neither one of them is there any longer. So, you know, that'll just be one of those things that we you know, start dealing with in January.
Mhm.
And similarly, I would envision a joint coordinating role for us on, you know, items before the PSC, right? And potential regulations that impact our operations.
That's a little trickier for me. Like, you know, David, you guys are
Yeah.
statutory, you know, you've got a statutory seat at the table in front of the commission, whereas, you know, the SEU doesn't. I mean, you know, we could, and, you know.
You don't have a prohibition on weighing in. You're just saying you don't have a statutory role necessarily.
We've weighed in before and we've been told to retract our comments.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm kind of careful about,
Understood.
you know, how I approach matters in front of the commission.
And the basis for that was,
I think someone in the Attorney General's office didn't like what I said one day.
interesting. Okay. But there's
It wasn't personal.
no. I'm just trying to understand the structural reasoning behind that, if there is one, or it was more substance based.
Yeah. You like it?
I think, you know, maybe the thought was the district government should have one voice before the commission. And maybe my voice didn't exactly square with the position that the district government wanted to take on a particular matter. So the government is, you know, is a statutory party to all cases in front of the commission. The SEU is not.
Right. Okay. Good to know.
Eli, as y'all move forward, it'd also be helpful to think about the types of projects that you want to invest in, because having spent a lot of time at like DCRA on the construction regulatory side of things and the zoning and all that as well, you know, it'd be good to know how to make a real glide path for types of projects that you want to invest in as well as you're sort of thinking through those, because there are many things that pop up that are unexpected, and I think there's a lot of room for leadership there. Just generally, there's many things that happen that can slow down pioneering projects, doing different types of buildings and different types of techniques and strategies. So,
No, that's a good area to raise. You know, I think just for the group's benefit, and some of you all have heard Mike kind of laying out the transportation the sectors, but our focus area, at least initially, is on solar, which, you know, in DC is primarily rooftop. We are looking at a couple of solar plus storage projects, so that'll be some interesting wrinkles. Building efficiency, particularly with the building energy performance standards coming online. Obviously an area that SEU has got a ton of experience and work on in place. Vehicle electrification. Building efficiency includes, in my mind anyway, building electrification in some instances, right? So I don't want to leave that off. But vehicle electrification, and there, Dave, I think is probably the most novel right now, given, you know, charging infrastructure questions, financial questions about who's paying for which pieces, and then how we finance that. I think there's a lot of fertile ground for work on the regulatory process, both the DCRA type and the Public Service Commission. And then the last area is stormwater abatement, which I think is one area that doesn't cover SEU at all, right, Ted? Except for sort of tangentially.
You mean the stormwater stuff?
Right.
Yeah, we
yeah.
You know, look, when we go into a building, I mean, tangentially, when we go into a building, multifamily building, we might install low flow faucet aerators, low flow shower heads, which significantly reduces the amount of water that's used in the building. That creates energy savings as well, because you're not having to heat as much water, and pump as much water. So, but the storm water stuff is not in our wheelhouse. No, we don't do anything there.
Yeah.
Great. So then, what do we think our goals ought to be for the committee?
The goals for the committee, you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
I would say at a high level, making sure that, even initially, we kind of do a categorization or just a listing of, who's working in this space. That doesn't mean that everybody who's working in this space comes to participate in this committee necessarily, but doing an inventory of some sort of who's working in this space. I would do, I'd say just a little bit of a market analysis, and then trying to understand, where some of the needs might be in the marketplace. You guys may have done a lot of this, clearly you've done a lot of work. I wasn't a part of it. But some of those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that so there's so the bill on what Ted's saying, there's this coordination piece. So understanding the lay of the land and making sure the parts are coordinated and working well together, cooperating, to reference the title of our committee. And really, I'm really interested in sort of the strategic acupuncture type focus of how you make real change in hard to reach places and hard to reach goals. The city has pretty clear targets in the Clean Energy DC plan, the sustainability goals that we're trying to get to, and there's hurdles that we need to get over and beyond. And I really have hopes that the Green Bank will be able to make those things possible in some of the hardest to reach places. So I think identifying those would be really important to make.
Did you ever see that there's a comic that has the two scientists at the blackboard, and there's like a page of equations all over the blackboard, and then there's a little one that says a miracle occurs, and one of the scientists is saying to them, I think you got a problem with your analysis right here. Like, sometimes I feel like the Green Bank has sort of been plugged into a lot of those spots where it's like, we got this goal and we've got these problems, but the Green Bank's gonna figure that out, right? So,
yeah, not to put too much pressure on y'all. No,
it's good.
But anyway, but I think, and this is working with SCU, this is working with DOE and regulations, all these different pieces, in the hub and so forth. But yeah, I think trying to get at places that the current players have a harder time getting to for whatever reason, Ted has a bunch of performance metrics that he has to think about every time he's thinking about investment and these things. And so y'all will have performance metrics, but they may allow you to do different types of investment and do it in really creative ways. So that's exciting to me, really figuring out how to hustle for good work. It makes me think often about you see a really great project and you're like, well, how did they get this great project? And it's like, well, they got it because they had really smart people on their team. And how'd they do that at cost or less than cost, build this net zero energy building that's great, when this guy over here can't even build a conventional building at cost and it's overrun. It's like, well, they have smart people who thought about it and followed a good process and did the right things and did it for the right reasons with the right intent and values, and that's how they did it. So I'm hoping that's the kind of role that can be filled in the space. And to name a few ideas, I mean, I think like, bringing high performance buildings to the affordable housing space in more of a real way. So like, really understanding the financial products like the low income housing tax credit and new market tax credit, all those different pieces, and like the whole bidding process and the way that actually happens, and getting involved and there, and like letting people know at an early enough point in time that this is an option to them to work with the Green Bank would be a really great way. It would be one thing. Some of the stuff you're doing with solar already, I think is fantastic, and so that would be another focus there. And then bringing sort of like high efficiency buildings, and particularly in some of the unsexy type efficiency strategies, I think would be really important. So like enclosure, like building envelopes, air leakage type approaches that aren't solar panels. They're not glitzy. People don't see them, but they have huge impacts on a variety of different things. Health being one that people overlook often. So yeah, anyways, I'll stop there. But I think that type of creative thinking would be a great goal for this group, just generally. You mentioned also just like coordination between communications and that type of piece. I think that would be really great as well, because we do want to amplify the work that you're doing, and be coordinated on that front for sure.
Great. Ted, did you have another thought?
Yeah.
Well, it's not the work of this committee, but I think it's clearly the work between your organization and ours, which is, making sure that our account managers and your team are communicating very directly, so that, you understand some of the projects that we're looking at, and I extend that to the solar team as well. Like our big solicitation for the year closed last night at 5 o'clock. So we'll go into a process over the next couple of weeks of evaluating proposals, and we'll have a number of different opportunities out there, on the very, very near horizon, that might be good for, a conversation with you and the bank about how they finance these projects. So, that's on the solar side, and our account managers are, year round looking at, different opportunities just to make sure that those connections are happening. Like I said, that's not this committee, but it's just, between our two organizations, I want to make sure that those conversations are happening.
I think it's an appropriate role for the committee to be a encourager and a backstop for that, right? Like if there were problems in coordination, or if we weren't hearing from someone, none of this is happening, but I'm just saying, I think it's a good, you set the tone at the top, right, that coordination is important and that we support it, right? But I agree, it's not going to happen in this committee. On the solar side, I think it's just worth noting, we did sign one letter of intent to continue our support for the flywheel projects, which I'm sure you will take a look at. We're interested in supporting both projects that are selected, as well as the next tier of projects that didn't quite make the cut. And so I think that's a great opportunity for us to partner directly, where outside of the rebate programs, there may be some projects that are almost just outside the line, right? Almost eligible, or eligible, but just not enough funding.
Some of those projects make good economic sense, even if they're not a CREF that's supplying credits for low-income customers, just as a market rate project. I mean, they make good economic sense. So, clearly, there'll be a number, and we've got some new people who bid this year. We're not familiar with their organization, so yeah,
that's great.
Bringing new folks to the city to look at opportunities here, I think, is a good thing.
And Ted, when do you all expect to make announcements?
First week of December, probably.
Okay, great. Well, so I think we've got some good material for some goals that we can draft up and then workshop. Does the monthly cadence sound about right to folks? Recognizing the next month is December, so there's a lot going on, but I think it'd be good for us to touch base.
Yeah.
We can always ramp it down after we kind of get stood up and
Yeah. I
operating.
think it's a good place to start, in my opinion. So, with Eli, it sounds so. And with respect to your advisory board, our interaction with them will be advised. If questions are posed to us, we would advise on those questions through this committee. But like attending like board meetings or something like that, is there any expectation or?
I'd say no expectation in a regular basis. It's certainly, I think, and Todd, I'd welcome your thoughts on this. My thought is at some point, maybe late spring next year, after we've all done some more of the groundwork, that having a session where we brief the board directly on, what we've been doing, what our initial recommendations are, and answer any questions they have. I think that would be helpful. The board is going to be shifting to bi-monthly meetings next year, but they like to have outside perspectives. Todd, does that sound useful to you?
Extremely useful. I think it gives a time enough for us to digest and to establish the charters. I would only be repeating what David and Ted already said. I see the highlights of this committee is communication and coordination. I think one of the end results I would see is not only to have a unified stance, so presenting not only to the board but also to council, and to be able to show that through this communication coordination with the different agencies and utilities, that there's no redundancy, that the DCSU and the DC Green Bank are not being redundant on efforts, but looking to get out these high efficiency products and to work collaboratively.
Well said.
Absolutely.
Well, we're coming up on the 2 o'clock hour, so I want to be mindful of folks' times. Sandy, did we need something for the statement for the annual report?
I think for the annual report, we can, if we have something ready to go, that's great. If we don't, I think we can just focus on profiles of people. So just anticipate that I will reach out to each of you to generate some content for the pages that are devoted in our annual report that are devoted to this particular committee.
Okay.
Great, thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see everyone.
And I
Yeah.
will, I'll
catch
look
up.
for that template. Now, Eli, I'll just send it to you under separate cover, okay?
Sounds good. And
Okay.
look for Nora to reach out on a date if she has not yet. So
Right, and we'll be talking to your folks next week, I believe. Anyway,
that's right,
all
on Monday.
I'll
Looking forward to
talk
it.
to you next. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you next week.